She was not only beautiful, but also naive, and her uncle happened to be the director of the company where he had just landed a job. All he needed to do was to catch Genesis' attention, so he embarked on his plan. John discovered that Genesis had a potential suitor. However, he didn't let that discourage him. He started paying attention to her, inviting her to lunch, and offering her a ride home after work. At first, Genesis pretended that it was only a friendly relationship, but after 2 months of persistent courtship, John succeeded in winning her over. I informed Anthony that it wasn't going to work out. "I love you, John," Genesis whispered. "But please, let's keep our relationship a secret." "Of course," he replied. The following day, word had spread throughout the entire company that Genesis had left her promising fiancé for a new manager who had no money to his name. Unsurprisingly, Mr. Nathan Williams, Genesis' uncle and a director of the firm, discovered her affair. As the brother of her late father, who owned the shares, he was the only close relative of Genesis. Nathan was fond of Anthony, as he and Genesis hailed from the same social background, and by marrying him, Genesis could grow her inherited wealth. On the other hand, John Nathan didn't inspire trust. He decided to protect his young niece from making a mistake. However, their relationship was not so close and trusting, so Nathan asked his daughter, Amelia, to have a frank conversation with Genesis and give her a warning. Amelia wasn't exactly excited about the idea of having an educational chat with her younger sister, but she still made an effort to share her thoughts about Genesis' new relationship during lunch. "You should have chosen John over Anthony," Amelia advised. "Why?" Genesis asked. "John isn't the most reliable guy. He only has ambition and nothing else," Amelia explained. "But I have everything. I'll help him build a successful career," Genesis countered. "And then what?" Amelia questioned. "Then we'll get married and start a family," Genesis replied. "And just like in a fairy tale, you'll live happily ever after," Amelia teased. "We'll live forever," Genesis responded with a hum. "But on a serious note, what is all of this about?" "We are concerned about you. The entire office is gossiping about you. Rumors are floating around, but hardly anyone believes that John is genuine." "Why do you think that? Do you believe that I am unworthy of love?" Genesis exclaimed, her anger rising. "Look at me, I am beautiful. My figure is perfect, and I have a lovely face. Plus, I have everything. A fancy car, a fur coat, and a healthy bank account." "That's precisely the problem. You are the perfect target for Alfonso." "John is not an Alfonso. He loves me, unlike all of you. You are all just envious of me." "What?" Amelia gasped. "You are envious of me, which is why you are saying all of this. Every girl in the company would love to have John choose her. He is incredibly handsome and knows how to charm. But he picked me. You are all out of luck, while I am happy. So do not try to prevent me from building my happiness with the man I love." Amelia listened to her sister and rose from the table. "Since you're undoubtedly intelligent, you can handle the lunch bill on your own," he stated bluntly, leaving Genesis to finish her meal in solitude. Genesis nonchalantly shrugged and made her exit as well. She couldn't help but feel disheartened by the judgment she received from her loved ones. It was a lonely experience, which prompted her to confide in John. Upon hearing her plight, he expressed sympathy and reassured her, "Ignore the opinions of others. I love you unconditionally. To illustrate my sincerity, let's solidify our commitment by getting married. Will you marry me?" Taken aback, Genesis's immediate response was to agree wholeheartedly, caught up in the whirlwind of emotions. Without hesitation, John procured an engagement ring. Though it wasn't as extravagant as Genesis may have desired, it was still significant enough to proudly announce their impending union, especially to his influential uncle. Word spread like wildfire throughout the office on the very same day, unveiling the news of John and Genesis's impending nuptials. Nathan, though internally dismayed, begrudgingly accepted the situation, acknowledging Genesis of autonomy as a capable, independent woman. However, he did propose a prenuptial agreement as a sign of caution and practicality. What is happening, Uncle? How am I expected to propose to him in such a way? Genesis refused to listen to reason. Genesis became anxious and isolated. She felt as if everyone around her harbored ill will towards her, and no one was pleased about her upcoming marriage. At the same time, she was overwhelmed with emotions for her chosen partner. She and John started actively preparing for the celebration. They hired event planners, spent money on various details, and acted like two spoiled children. John didn't contribute a single cent towards the wedding, but demanded unreasonable expenses from Genesis. "I want the photo shoot to happen in a helicopter," he stated, "but I have a fear of flying. You love me, don't you? Then you'll just have to deal with it." Genesis let out a sigh and agreed to everything until she reached her credit card limit. The remaining funds were in her bank account. "I had a desire to invite the shining stars of the entertainment industry to attend our wedding. Here is the meticulously curated list." Genesis took a glance at the prices and was immediately struck with shock. "We may need to make some sacrifices if we want to have any stars at our wedding." "We already have a stellar host, at least," Genesis suggested. "Maybe we could withdraw some funds from your account," John hinted. "I'm not entirely convinced that would be a wise decision," Genesis replied. "But we've dreamed about this for so long. Is it even worth having a wedding if it's just going to be like everyone else's?" "John, sometimes I feel like the wedding means more to you than it does to me," Genesis expressed. "What? That's preposterous. Don't you trust me?" John exclaimed. "Of course I do," Genesis reassured, feeling confused. "Are your relatives pressuring you again? You should distance yourself from them. And as for my uncle, he's been sitting on the throne for too long. It's time to overthrow him and choose a new leader. I can take over the company, and everything will be even better. Don't you think your uncle is swindling you and pocketing too much?" Genesis let out a sigh and contemplated her words. The preparations for the wedding were consuming all her available time. She couldn't help but regret agreeing to organize it on such short notice. She even wished that she and John had taken more time to get to know each other better. However, all the money had already been spent, and it was impossible to reschedule anything. Moreover, she didn't want to feel embarrassed in front of her colleagues. Just like many other girls, Genesis had always dreamed of a beautiful wedding. That's why she didn't turn down any of her fiancé's requests. Unfortunately, the demands were so high that they were running out of time and funds at an alarming rate. "Maybe we should have planned the wedding for the winter," she suggested. "In the winter? In the cold? You must be out of your mind." John grimaced. "No, I despise winter. I've always dreamt of moving down south, where it's warm. But I have an affinity for the snow. The magic of New Year's Eve, the glistening tree, the enchanting frost. There was a time when my father and uncle would take me skiing. However, that chapter has come to an end. You can't bring your father back, Genesis. Now you have me, and together we will lead our lives according to our desires, not relying on your relatives." John interrupted her. "I believe 1 month will be sufficient for us," John continued. "Sufficient for what?" Genesis questioned. "Enough time to establish and stabilize our own company, and then we can make our exit," John replied confidently. "What do you mean, make our exit? We haven't discussed this," Genesis protested. "We haven't had a discussion, have we? Or do you plan on working and living in this place indefinitely? I explicitly stated that we were moving to a warmer location, somewhere with eternal sunshine," John stated firmly. "And how do you expect us to sustain ourselves?" Genesis inquired, not fully comprehending John's plan. "Don't concern yourself with that. I will ensure that our finances are utilized wisely. Your role is to trust me. After all, women possess an innate beauty while men are gifted with intelligence, don't they?" John explained, implying his superiority. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Genesis furrowed her brow in confusion. "I will take care of the financial side, so you don't have to worry. However, to do that effectively, I require more decision-making power. We can discuss this matter after the wedding, Genesis responded. Lately, she had been growing increasingly tired of the constant business discussions. It bothered her that John seemed to view her as superficial and attempted to exert control over her. Amelia, Genesis' sister, seemed determined to stir up trouble. It was almost as if she intentionally sought to highlight John's incompetence. Why haven't you provided a progress report? How long must the customer wait? The inbox is overflowing. Do you even bother to read the bids? Amelia ostentatiously accused John of failing to fulfill his duties. Initially, John paid no mind to her remarks, but after a major scandal involving a customer and upper management, he cornered Amelia against the wall and hissed, "Soon, Genesis will become my wife, and I will assume the leadership role in the company. Once this occurs, my first order of business will be to rid the company of my current staff members. Both you and your father will no longer be a part of it. Are you genuinely that unintelligent, or are you merely pretending? Nathan is the individual who single-handedly keeps everything running smoothly. On the other hand, you lack the necessary experience and knowledge to successfully manage a business. Therefore, if my father were to leave, the company would be doomed. You have an inflated opinion of your father. I had higher expectations of you, thinking you would be smarter than your sister. It turns out you are just as foolish." Amelia glanced sympathetically at her sister's fiancé, feeling sorry for Genesis. She informed her father of John's threats, and the following morning, he summoned Genesis to his office. "I've decided to focus on my business. You are an adult and have a fiancé who desires to take the lead, so it is time to pass the torch to the younger generation." Genesis couldn't believe what Nathan said. She didn't want Nathan to go, but she also understood that she couldn't work with both him and John. Being torn between her in-laws and her husband wasn't what she wanted for her life. "You're not angry with me?" she asked. "No, I'm not," Nathan replied. "Thank you for making a wise decision. However, I can't afford to buy your share right now. All the money went towards the wedding. Unless we dip into the reserve account," Genesis trailed off. "Consider it my wedding gift," Uncle smiled. Genesis hugged him, and they discussed the details. John stayed quiet, planning to reveal the surprise later. However, word quickly spread, and John discovered that his dreams were starting to come true. The registration of the wedding between Genesis and John occurred a few days before the actual celebration. The formal proceedings took place in the absence of their relatives and friends. They simply went to the registry office, signed the necessary documents, and then went their separate ways. John departed for work while Genesis went to her final dress fitting. However, the fitting had been delayed, so Genesis decided to return to work instead. Upon entering Nathan's office, Genesis was taken aback. She saw John sitting there, occupying the seat where her father used to sit. John had his feet up on the desk and was comfortably reclining in the executive chair, gazing out through the expansive window. He held a glass in his hand. "What are you doing here?" Genesis exclaimed. "I'm just getting acquainted," he replied with a grin, showing no embarrassment in front of the firm's owner. "Genesis, tell him to bring me some coffee. Or better yet, bring it yourself. Don't you order girls?" Genesis was quite upset for some inexplicable reason. She couldn't help but recall her father and his meticulous approach to business. How he cherished his office, how he treated his documents with utmost reverence, and how he always maintained order on his table. And there was John, disrespectfully placing his muddy shoes on top of the files. Without any regard for permission, he even dared to go into her father's closet and retrieve a bottle. "You better come here," John beckoned Genesis, attempting to provoke a reaction. However, Genesis was not one to fall for his tricks. "Finish the show. This is work, not some kind of spectacle." She pointedly gestured towards the bottle. "And please, remove your feet from the table before you ruin it." "What's the matter, Genesis? You become a wife, and suddenly you turn into a nag." John attempted to turn the situation into a joke. but Genesis was too agitated to find it amusing. "What do we have here? Did you search through his drawer? Take a look, Genesis. I'm the one in charge of this family now. Your father no longer cares, and we have a wonderful and prosperous life ahead of us." Before he had the chance to utter a word, the telephone on the desk began to ring. "Yeah, okay, I'm right here," he responded. "Who was that?" Genesis inquired. "It was a work-related call. You go ahead, Genesis. You have a fitting and plenty to do," he replied. "You didn't answer my question. Who called?" she pressed. John, the receptionist, was the one. A voice came from the doorway. "Send them in. This is now my office," he instructed. Genesis clenched her fists, demanding an explanation. However, John stood up and firmly guided his wife out of the room. "Don't impede the men from working. Focus on women's matters, Genesis," he stated. "This is my firm, and I deserve to know what's happening here," she exploded. "No, it's not just your firm, it's mine too. Now go and don't argue." John's smile disappeared. He noticed that the man waiting in the hallway could hear their conversation. Genesis realized that John had something up his sleeve and hastily left the office. "Anthony," she spotted her ex-fiancé. "Hello, Genesis. What are you doing here?" "I want to buy the firm." "But I don't." "Stay out of it, Genesis. I'll talk to you later." John cut her off. "Come in, Anthony. Excuse my wife. She's been out of sorts all morning. Too happy to finally be my wife." "Congratulations, Genesis. I hope you're happy." Anthony looked into her eyes, and Genesis realized that she had overreacted to the wedding. When the door to the study closed, she sat down on the couch and cried. She felt sorry for herself and for the time she had wasted. She felt even more sorry for the firm that John was going to sell without her knowledge. She was scared because officially she now had a legal spouse who was entitled to her property. She didn't know what to do and thought of nothing better than to call her uncle. "Do you have feelings for him, Genesis? Just be completely honest, regardless of what anyone else may say, even though the wedding expenses have already been covered." "Well, I suppose not." Genesis burst into tears. She was feeling lost and uncertain about herself and her emotions. "Take a moment to calm down and think through everything. I can't give you advice. You have to make your own decisions. However, I can ask you this. If you could go back to the day you first met him, would you still choose to go back to that very same day and agree to marry him?" Genesis pondered for a moment. Much to her surprise, she shook her head in disagreement. "No, I shouldn't have gone through with it. I mistakenly believed that he loved me, but it seems like his love is for money. It's a good thing that you've recognized that now. It's time for you to go and inform him that the wedding ceremony is off and that you have initiated divorce proceedings. I had a suspicion that it would come to this, so I've already made arrangements with a lawyer. Don't worry, he won't receive anything. But, everything you possess was given to you before the marriage. Any attorney will have no difficulty establishing this fact. What did you purchase today?" "I made a payment for his suit." "That's fantastic. John won't be left in a vulnerable situation. He will have to acknowledge the suit as joint property," chuckled his uncle. Genesis wasn't laughing, but Nathan was. He had successfully resolved everything just as he had promised. The divorce was almost painless, and Genesis was free. John was furious, but he had no recourse. He had to resign from his job and relocate. Genesis had no idea how his life would unfold from that point on. Besides contempt, she felt nothing for him and hoped that fate would introduce him to a deserving woman who would be capable of exposing him before the wedding. Genesis offered her apologies to Amelia for being impolite and not believing her warnings. She then extended an invitation to Nathan to return to the firm, but he declined. "I believe you have enough experience to venture out on your own. I will assist you in finding a competent manager while I continue to operate my own business." "Where can I find managers with your qualifications?" Genesis let out a sigh. "I have someone in mind. He has expressed interest in taking over both the company and you." Nathan winked as he dialed Anthony's number. Genesis blushed, feeling embarrassed in front of her former fiancé. However, she agreed that he would be an excellent candidate to assume control. He repurchased some stocks and implemented significant changes that propelled the business forward. Genesis found herself visiting his office more frequently, not just for business discussions. Anthony still harbored feelings for her and forgave Genesis for her past mistakes. Perhaps, in due time, they would not only have a successful partnership at work, but something more.